one of the things that I thought maybe we can start and just see where it takes us is maybe a little get to know Henry. How did you get involved in IP? What was your first start? Where did you begin this career?
Yeah, thanks, Gene. And before I start, I do want to thank Gene, Renee, and the whole Watchdog team for hosting this wonderful event. Your voice is so important, and I very much appreciate what you do. I also want to thank all of you for being here today, and I'm glad some of you decided to go get a beverage because now it may seem a little bit more coherent to you. I'm sticking with the seltzer until after this. So to answer your question, I don't think any of us in this room as a child said, I want to be a patent attorney. In fact, I don't think I even knew what that was, even going to law school. I happened to have a biology degree undergrad. I thought I was going to be a doctor. I was terrible in the lab. I couldn't give injections to rabbits in immunology lab. I was squeamish, so I said, I better do something else. Growing up in the family I grew up in, my parents said, you have 3 choices in life. You can be a doctor, a lawyer, or a garbage man. Nothing wrong with any of those choices, but ultimately I said lawyer seems the path of least resistance. And I applied to law school, not realizing that there was an opportunity to use my science undergrad degree or in patent law. And I only found out about it when I applied to law firms, and the law firms that wanted to interview me specialized in patent law, and this was back in 1990. So that's how I got into it.
That's interesting. So I actually did get into patent law, go to law school on purpose to do patent law, because I was at Rutgers and I was electrical engineer. And when the class was 800 people large, I was ranked 400. When the class was 200 people, I was ranked 100. I struggled to just always get into the middle. And then there was one day I realized in my junior year that I was fighting against what God had intended me to do, probably. Yeah. And I saw on the bulletin board, back when we used to have to go and consume information in a location with push pins, remember? And I'm reading, it's like, patent law. I'm like, what's that? And it's like, that might be my out of engineering. And that's how I got into it. So it's interesting to hear that you kind of stumbled into this, really.
Oh, completely, like many things. And I came from a family in the entertainment field. My father was a songwriter in the 50s and 60s. For you guys who like the oldies, V-A-C-I-T-I-O-N, anyone? People from Europe, a one-way ticket to the blues, that was my dad. And then my mom's younger brother grew up in the 60s, was part of the hippie generation, was in hair, and then wrote his own musical and his own music, and had several hit songs later during the disco era, like Last Dance and It's Raining Men. So I grew up with them around me, and I think it sort of imbued me with an appreciation of creativity. I mean, they loved what they did, they loved what they created, and I saw how much it meant to them. And I think part of why I'm so passionate about what I do now, granted on the science side, is because I saw what it meant to them.
Yeah. Yeah, creativity is interesting because right brain, left brain, but it is all creative.
Right.
And it does take a different mind to create. And so you're in the law school, you're moving into this direction, you've got where was your first job?
So I got a summer associate gig at the firm of Morgan and Finnegan. Anyone remember Morgan and Finnegan? Yeah, we got a few. IP boutique firm in New York City. That was summer associate of 1990. And I was very excited because I always wanted to get myself a guitar. So I went and bought a really cheap guitar with my first paycheck at Manny's Music. And I still have it. It's a terrible guitar. The strings are this far off the frets, but yeah. I still have it.
So do you still play?
Yes, not very well, but I do.
Yeah. What's your favorite genre?
Just old classic rock stuff. Yeah.
So, and I know this is not IP related. Well, maybe it is to some extent. Who do you think is the greatest guitarist of all time?
Oh man.
So, and I think there's a right answer, and there's acceptable alternatives, but there's a right answer here. No pressure.
I think by consensus, Jimi Hendrix.
Okay, I would accept that answer, but I don't think the right answer.
Okay, who do you think?
I think it's Eddie Van Halen.
Okay, well, He was part of our, the generation I grew up in. He was terrific. Yeah.
He was. And then all of a sudden he kind of went more pop with
the keyboard thing.
The keyboard
that
thing was just, and he just popped into my head as you were talking about this, because I was just listening to Eruption the other day, and now there was this woman was playing Eruption on a violin.
Oh.
And it's like, oh my God, that's just like a different level of.
Welcome, folks, to the Van Halen podcast today.
Yeah, this is the Van. No, but we all had our start somewhere in IP, and IP touches so much of our lives, whether it's the movies we watch, or the TV shows that we watch, or the sports, which is protected because of the streaming now, or its distribution over the air, or it's music, or it's what's more near and dear to our heart day to day is the invention in a whole bunch of different areas. What is the coolest, to the extent that you can pick just one, or maybe there's a couple, what do you think is the coolest invention that you've had the privilege to be involved with? And I say it that way because that, I know you're at a point where you're doing a lot for the company and you're not maybe doing the frontline day-to-day stuff. So what's the coolest thing that you've seen?
So many great things, right? So many things which have changed so many lives. I've had the privilege of being the Chief IP Counsel at Bristol Myers Squibb. Next year will be my 15th year. I had about 10 years at Shearing Plough before it was acquired by Merck. I saw a lot of great innovations that have made a big difference in patients' lives. Probably the one that I have the most affection for, and frankly is incredibly impressive, was the being there at the front line of immuno-oncology. And knowing that Bristol Myers Squibb did the first deal with ultimately a Nobel Prize winner, Jim Allison from MD Anderson, around an antibody to the CTLA-4 receptor, which is now a product Yervoy, which was the first IO drug for treating melanoma. And then doing a deal ultimately with Dr. Hanjo from Kyoto University, who I got to know quite well, who also won the Nobel Prize a few years ago. And he was the one who discovered, he was actually looking for receptors in the immune space. How do you modulate immune response for autoimmune disease? And he found this receptor, which was called PD-1, and he posited that if you block it, potentially you can modulate the immune system. But ultimately, it came very clear that this was a way to treat cancer too, because cancer tricks the immune system into thinking it's normal. And by masking that receptor, you instead get a response to treating cancer. And not only was that approved for melanoma, but for non-small cell lung cancer, renal cell cancer. I mean, the list goes on and on, probably about a dozen different indications, because it applies across different indications because of the fact that it activates your immune system. It's not specific to a cancer. So that was incredibly cool to work on that, for now about 12 years.
So let me ask you, you have a front line to a lot of what's going on in the medical space, in the therapeutic space, and how close do you think we are to curing cancer? Will we do it during our lifetime? I know we get incrementally better at treating it, and some cancers are much more curable in air quotes than other cancers, but are we going to eradicate cancer? Are you and I going to see that? Do you think?
I think what we are seeing, we're living through right now, is that some cancers we will be able to cure in as much as there will be a full remission that's sustainable over a long period of time. I think other cancers probably within our lifetime will be manageable diseases that hopefully you have enough time that the next therapy comes and the next therapy comes, and that you're able to have a sustained remission because of that. And I think some are just really naughty and it's going to take longer because there's so many different reasons for cancer. Some are due to certain mutations that manifest themselves in different ways at different times in your life. So I think that the bulk of them, though, will start becoming more manageable, hopefully, and some will be cured.
So let me ask you, to pivot maybe a little bit more into the IP space. It's no shock to anybody in this room or that's been paying attention to the IP space that diagnostics have become unpatentable, which is just I have trouble actually saying that, right? Because it's stupid. I mean, you can't treat something you can't diagnose. The treatments don't come until you have a diagnosis. And with cancer, the earlier you have a diagnosis, the better the chance of survival is, regardless of what the cancer is. In some cancers, you have more time to get to that diagnosis than other cancers. But there are some cancers, if it's not diagnosed earlier, it's a death sentence.
Right.
Do you think, not we as scientists, but do you think we as a people, as a society, are taking seriously enough the damage that has been done to medical diagnostics by the patent system? Because to me, I want more diagnostics, not less. I want places like, the Cleveland Clinic and St. Jude's and some of the, Sloan Ketterings. I mean, some of the greatest research hospitals and treatment hospitals in the country looking for diagnosis. And they're not doing it on the level they can because the university people particularly will tell you they can't get these startups funded.
Right.
Because there's no rights, there's no patents, there's no value. And investors, which Sherry was talking about investors earlier, there's so much more that they can invest in that has a higher return with much less risk than in this area, which is an area where we really need investment. So there's a lot on the table. I did that on purpose to let you take the safe route and answer whatever you want to answer there, because some of it there's no answers for. But what say you altogether?
Yeah, altogether. Well, okay, first, I should have said at the outset, I'm just speaking on my own behalf, not for the company, but I think it's pretty consistent with the industry view, right? I have a firm belief that the patent system incentivizes innovation and investment and development. I think we started with surgery for, let's say, cancer, and then we moved to radiation and then chemotherapy, right? And then certain biomarkers were identified early on, which had an association with certain types of cancers, and then they were correlated to treatments, targeted medicine with biomarkers. And then maybe right after that was immuno-oncology. But my point is that when you identify a new receptor or something that's novel and not obvious, right? First, remember, you're not getting a patent just because it's eligible. You're only getting it if it was novel and unobvious, and you're teaching the world how to make it. You want to incentivize people to do that work and correlate that biomarker, that receptor, to a disease state and a treatment. And if we can get more startups to do it, I think we're going to, address the cures to cancer even more quickly.
Is that happening now, or has over? Let's just pick a date, and the dates that probably stick out are, 2012 and 2013 when you had Myriad and you had Mayo. Yeah. I mean, can you give us a sense, compare and contrast, where were we with respect to investment and pursuit of diagnostics before, and where are we after, including up to today?
I think we have to distinguish between companies, bigger companies that are developing their own molecules, what they're doing, right? We're going to do everything we can to find the right patient subpopulations to treat a condition. So we will have folks looking into the biomarkers and wondering whether there should be a diagnostic associated with a drug. I think that's different than saying that academic institutions and startups are going to start doing that themselves and create that ecosystem that we think is so valuable, which is, either the public funded academic institutions or private startups that are VC funded are in there going, we think there's something we can do here. We can do something special, and we can encourage more investment in treating these diseases. And I think that's what's missing here.
Yeah. Can you give us sort of like maybe just an order of magnitude? I mean, and that's the question, but let me backfill a little bit, because it might be useful to talk about what is the relationship between large pharma and universities. Because it seems to me over the years, government gives universities grants to do research that too speculative to expect the private sector to do. Sometimes they hit a home run, sometimes they hit a double, sometimes they hit a grand slam. And now it's really interesting, really exciting. And then they get some funding to go through the valley of death. and then hopefully maybe a Bristol Myers or maybe one of your competitors becomes interested enough because they're working on that project or have interest in that population, and then you partner with this university startup, and then that's when it gets put on steroids, right? And it may still fail because it may not play out in the clinical trials, which is always a risk, but that whole ecosystem relies on the university particularly and the startup to grow. And I think that the carpet has just been pulled out from under that group, which not only affects that group, the universities and the startup and the R&D companies, but affects Bristol Myers and other large companies, right?
I agree. And I think when I've characterized what 101 has done to sort of the effort to treat and cure diseases, I say it actually disproportionately impacts academic institutions and startups, because half the time a company like ours or other large biopharma are going to have to take a license, right? If there is a valid patent that covers, let's say, the mechanism of action for treating a certain type of cancer that came from that academic institution or that startup, right? And now with 101 calling that into question, I'm not sure you have to worry about that as much, right? The second thing, I just want to also point out a little plug for my own pet peeve, which is what has happened to 112. Because in a world where 112 only covers what you specifically have done, which I feel like after Amgen v. Sanofi, we're kind of there, those sort of mechanism of action patents, a method of treating cancer by blocking X receptor, I'm not sure they're going to be upheld. They may be, they may not be, depending on what's in the specification. But under the current state of the law, it's at least questioned whether they would be upheld. So between that and 101, I don't know if the ecosystem is that healthy for academic institutions and startups, because we all know that they're really great at some basic science. And maybe startups can go one step further and actually develop or identify a molecule. But ultimately, you need the heft and the clinical ability of a larger biopharma company to first identify and create maybe a new molecule and then develop it all the way through approval, as you heard today, ad nauseum, 12 to 15 years, a couple of $1 billion, failure after failure before you have a success. This is not for the faint-hearted.
No. In the Amgen case, really, it disturbed me. And if you didn't really follow that case or follow that patent as it went up to the Supreme Court, you probably don't understand why that's such a horrible decision. Because the facts were the patent application that they filed was like 400 pages long, had 26 examples. They were all the information submitted on DVDs. And I mean, you want to talk about enablement, that was like the gold standard when it was written. There'd never really been anything done more so than that, right? And what we found out was, well, that's just not enough, and it feels to me that we live in this space where I can't tell you what they're going to tell us we need to do, but I can predict with great certainty.
Never going to be enough.
It's never going to be enough.
Yeah,
and that just is, I think, so unfortunate. And I don't understand what Amgen really could have done. I mean, like in hindsight, what did they need? 800 pages, and they needed 26 examples wasn't enough? Would they need 52 examples, or at what point in time? And then the other part that really, and I don't think this came through in the Supreme Court decision. I'm 99% sure it did not. But if you look at that case, the testimony was actually not that the defendant couldn't have done this. It was that they could have done all of what was described. It just would have taken them a very long time to do it. But that speaks to the importance and scope of the innovation in my mind, not to whether it's enabled or not, because it seemed to me like an admission that it actually was enabled. They could do it. It just was going to take them a long time to do.
I'm from New Jersey, and I actually just saw the Bruce Springsteen movie last week. So, in Hungry Heart, he says something, he took a wrong turn, and I just kept going, like a river that was overflowing, right? And I feel like it actually dates all the way back, was it to the 70s, when the Supreme Court interpreted discovery or invention as invention. And the idea of discovering something that was sort of a product of nature or a process of nature was not in itself inventive unless you tacked something else on which was novel and non-obvious, et cetera. And something like discovering a mechanism of action, if you're doing that and it's routine to figure out the ways to do it, then why wouldn't that be patentable?
I don't know. And I'm not familiar with that case that goes back that far, but I do know for sure in Myriad, Justice Thomas said almost, this is a paraphrase, but it's going to be pretty close to what he actually wrote, is no matter how important a discovery is, discoveries are not patent eligible.
And yet that's what the statute says.
And yet that's like the third word of the statute, right? It's actually the same word that's used in the Constitution. Yeah. And I don't make a lot of friends when I say this in some circles, but they're tasked, the Supreme Court and the Federal Circuit, with doing a lot of review of complex statutes, complex rules, complex technologies. I don't think it's too much to ask when the statute is literally one sentence long to read it, and give every word its meaning. And when the statute says discoveries are patent eligible, I think that's probably what Congress meant, because I think even a member of Congress can read that statute and understand that. And it's just very frustrating. And that's why it feels to me that it's never enough.
There's a lot of division in our industry about this issue, right?
Because there's a part of your industry that makes money.
Part of us doesn't want to have to license these patents, right? And there's a part that does. And my view is I would rather incentivize more innovation and then pick and choose, and then if I have to license, so be it. But it's ultimately better for patients. And I think it really lifts the industry too. So I was in favor of sort of more incentives for the type of research we're talking about here.
So I know in your space, patent trolls are not an issue, right? So, but I do think that there's sort of maybe a corollary or, some kind of association here, because I think with the whole patent troll issue, Congress and the courts have gotten to the point where they're like, okay, we're sick and tired of these shakedown artists. And ironically, they've done a lot to kill the industry, but nothing to do away with the extortion artists that are still out there and still operating. Longer story for a different day. But as they try to chase that bad actor away with reform and case decision and reform and more case decisions, what it does is it forces real innovators with real patents into the court system, not into the boardroom. Because the only recourse they have, because why would you take a license in the cell phone space, for example, and then it's not the only space, but why would you take a license to a US patent in that space when I'm probably never going to lose? And if I do lose, the amount I'm going to lose at the Federal Circuit, they're going to remit until I can pay it out as petty cash.
It's the efficient infringer.
Right. So you guys don't have that same issue, but it does feel to me like with these decisions on 101 and 112, that what they are doing is they're forcing you guys into the courtroom rather than into the boardroom to take licenses and do deals. And I think the law operates best when it forces everybody to engage in an arm's length negotiation. That's the Coase theorem.
Yeah. I mean, ultimately, you want people to publish this information. You want it out there so people can build on it and build on it. And if people are incentivized to keep things internal, right? Because for example, if you think you can get a patent around a new mechanism of action, great. But if you don't, you think I have to come up with a molecule and I don't want to give somebody a head start by publishing on this mechanism of action, do you hold it in your back pocket for longer? And how many years does that prevent a therapy? I mean, it's not a great incentive to not have a patent system which addresses this.
Right, and it's frustrating. And we're not going to solve that problem here today, but maybe one other question in the time that we have remaining is, I mean, you, like me, have been in the industry for a long time. You've seen a lot of growing pains and gone through a lot of different, good times, bad times. I'll share with you one of the frustrating things. It seems to me that over time, so many people have thought, well, this patent stuff, it's self-evident. Congress can't get this wrong because, of course, patent system fosters innovation. The Supreme Court can't get this wrong. And if they do, the Federal Circuit has always been there historically to fix it and clean it up. Well, guess what? None of that seems to be working. But I think we have a lot of people in a lot of different industries that are just keeping their head down, trying to fly under the radar. And by doing that, it just seems like the loud voices get to echo And the voices that know that this is crazy BS nonsense just aren't saying it. And it sort of, when there's a vacuum, conspiracy theories exist in a vacuum. And I'm not saying this is a conspiracy theory, but I think we all know that. When there's no information, people are allowed to leave it to their imagination what really happened. And I think a very similar thing is going on here. When one side is saying patents kill, patents get in the way of patients getting drugs, patents are the reason why drug prices are so high, none of which is true, by the way. But when there's no response to that, or not a big megaphone kind of response to that, people who are just kind of drive-by listening to that, I think could convince themselves, well, there must be something to it. I keep hearing it over and over again, and I don't hear the opposite view. Yeah. I mean, what advice would you have?
So I think, look, like, this is not just in our industry, right? This is everywhere. I think we, as an industry, we as a patent bar, we're used to a world where ultimately policy was decided by folks who had some sophistication and some interest in the long term. And I think as social media has sort of encouraged sort of the bullet point policy approach, which is, the patent kills or the troll or whatever sort of brand, evergreening, whatever that is. It doesn't matter how many times or how many pieces of data are generated which show these things are not accurate. And I think we all, if there's criticisms to be had, we'd all love to engage with those, right? I think we need to talk about them. I think access is hugely important, right? But I think as long as we're busy playing whack-a-mole with straight-out misrepresentations, it's very hard to engage in meaningful policy debate because people don't have the patience or the interest to hear more than the tagline.
Has it surprised you, though, that in the face of such just blatant lies, right? Like when they say some company's got 100 patents on a particular drug, and then you go and you actually look, and it's 4. It's not 100, it's 4. Right. I mean, but yet that keeps getting cited, it keeps getting used. And at what point in time, and how do we do this? How do we get the decision makers to realize, look, that group on this issue is simply not reliable because they're the little boy who cried wolf way too many times. You just can't trust anything that they say.
I'm glad you asked that question, Gene, because I asked AI about this. Hope, Brian, that's okay. I didn't put any confidential information in. How do we better educate Congress and stakeholders on the importance of IP, counter false narratives, and move towards sound fact-based IP policy? Now, luckily, the AI at least didn't show any bias toward its makers. But so bullet 1, educate through clear fact-based messaging on the economic impact of the patent system on innovation, using historical context and framing of narratives and success stories. So that's item 1 that AI told me to do. Counter false narratives with data, debunk misleading claims, expose conflicts of interest. Now that's an interesting one because every time I speak up, people go, oh, he's from Bristol Myers Squibb. Of course he thinks that. But there are plenty of people out there who are talking, you don't look further than LinkedIn, where people have these points of view, but they never say, well, by the way, I entirely represent a stakeholder here. Or I've been funded by an agenda-driven stakeholder. They may be, but it may be like 3 or 4 layers down, and it just doesn't bubble up in what they're saying, right? So I think that's a part of it. Engage stakeholders with strategic communications. So this is great, but I feel like the Costanzas, this has been the airing of the grievances, and we are in a world where we need to get this message out to people who don't necessarily understand or actually, frankly, are against us. So briefings and roundtables, I believe that if you can do that on the Hill and you have food, you will get people to show up. Tailored messaging using, I would say, PR firms that can create from academic research that is, I know, being generated right now, actually quite a bit on this subject. Things that are more pithy, more emotionally resonant, things that that will counteract the patents kill, right? And leveraging trusted voices, which I think we already do already. We had Judge Michelle and others speaking up here. and then building a coalition. This is one of my great frustrations, Gene, is that we are just not unified. All the pro-IP folks are not unified. We can't get on the same page as a small inventor groups. And we would be so much more effective if we could find common ground to work together.
Absolutely. And we've talked to, because we have Sherry here, and one of the things that Sherry very effectively did was defeat the claims and continuations rules. But and I witnessed that firsthand. I reported on that over and over again, followed it like it was a laboratory animal. So I maybe know a little bit more than a lot of people who are just kind of casually following that. But one of the things that I can tell you for sure happened was AIPLA did not take a position, and they finally, like a week before the decision, kind of took well, we're not going to be in favor of it. We're not going to be against it. We're going to take a non-position position, which was about the best that they could do because they had people on both sides of this particular issue. And what you see is that happen over and over and over again with, and no offense to IPO, but that is at times happen with IPO because Google is a big member of IPO, and there's people that believe what Google believes, and then there's other people that believe the opposite. So IPO a lot of times can't take a position. AIPLA can't take a position a lot of times. A lot of other industry groups can't take positions. And it's been suggested, I won't say who because I don't know that I have permission to say, but there's been a couple people, one in particular, who said what we really need in the industry is a nonprofit group that lists we are for these 10 things. And if you can agree with these 10 things, then join. And if you're for 9 but not 10, then don't join. And as soon as we achieve these 10, we're going to just sunset it. Because one of the other problems is once a group is formed, it never leaves the consciousness. Where I think the founding fathers, their idea of government was come in and then they left, and then a lot of them came back because they didn't like the way it was going. Right. But the goal was always to leave again, right? And I think we get politicians that don't leave. I think we get industry groups that don't leave, and then they cripple themselves because they have people on both sides. And I think that's a problem, and I don't know what we can do about it, but I think we should collectively talk about that so we have advocacy, because sometimes I don't think we have advocacy.
I feel like we have all the tools, and I feel like, Gene, you play an important role here in consolidating some of those tools.
I try, but as I was sharing with you before we go out on stage, it feels like we're shoveling water back into the ocean.
But I was going to have to use this analogy. I'm sorry. A lot of patent lawyers here, right? So how many of you watched Star Trek, the original series? Anyone? Okay. You guys remember that episode with Kirk and the Gorn? That big lizard creature? And he's much stronger than Kirk, and he's beating Kirk up all the time, and Spock and McCoy are watching through a viewer, and they can't communicate with him, but they're seeing that Kirk has all the tools to defeat the Gorn. He has a wooden funnel that he could use like a gun barrel, and he's got coal, and he's got sulfur and something else, and that's gunpowder. And I feel like we have all these ingredients here. And ultimately, Kirk does defeat the Gorn. So I feel like, I know, I'm such a geek. But my point is I think there's an opportunity here. If we can put these things together in the right way, the right coalitions, the right messaging, the right academic studies, the right taglines, that we can get ahead of steam. And people could start saying, you know what? I do want that next generation of cures. I want those innovations. And I recognize I'm not a dope. I recognize that people aren't going to do it if it's just going to get taken from them. And what about just the human dignity of respecting somebody's innovation? Like I saw with my family, with the creativity, respecting that innovation and giving them the opportunity to reap some type of revenue from that and drive it back into future innovation. I think that's really part of the American fabric, is that type of hard work and relentless drive, which ultimately leads to, elevating everybody in this country and, frankly, the world.
Yeah, I agree. I think, and I think that the commonality in this space, in the life sciences industry, should be around cancer treatments, cancer diagnosis, because it has touched probably everybody in this room. And you all have heard me talk about this before, but my mother was my best friend, and I still can't talk about it. I miss her. And she's been dead since 2012. And it just seems like we know what this does. We know what our area can unleash. We know the people who are investors have the same pain that we have, having lost loved ones to that horrible disease. And we know that the patents and innovation help. And we know that they prolong lives and they do cure some people, and they're going to continue to increasingly cure people. And I just, for the life of me, don't understand why a bunch of older members of Congress and older people on the Supreme Court aren't touched by that same thing. I mean, they have to live the same life that we've lived. But something isn't, there's a disconnect there that I just don't get.
I mean, it's intuitive, right? If you're going to spend a few $1 billion in 15 years and have countless failures, if someone can take it right away, you're not going to do it. I don't think that is too hard to understand. I think you just need the right forum and the right opportunity to make that case. I've been on panels with various folks over the years, including some of the folks we referenced earlier, who sort of are against the patent system, whether they're academics or sort of work for agenda-driven organizations. When I pose that to them, there's no answer.
No.
There's no answer when they say we should use Bayh-Dole to march in, and I say, well, then companies will never do a deal with a public institution again.
That's why Bayh-Dole exists, because they weren't doing deals with
There's
universities.
no answer to these things. So the more we can show that and say, look, this is doing great things, and we really need to continue encouraging it, the better. But we need to keep pushing it, and I do appreciate what you all are doing to at least you're a big part of it.
Well, we try, and I really appreciate you, and you've done so much for the industry and for so many in the industry, not just the industry itself. I mean, you've been a great friend, you've been a great mentor, and I wish the best for you. And
Thank you.
And from your lips to God's ears, maybe we can all come together and figure out a way to carry these stories across the finish line to make a difference. And because that's really what I want. I want to try and make a difference. The same way that all the researchers that you all work with, they don't do it for a paycheck, because if they were doing it for a paycheck, they'd be doing other things.
100%.
And they're particularly the university inventors. I mean, you don't get rich teaching or researching at a university. You're doing it for some other reason. And those people are the real heroes. Not that there aren't other heroes in our society. There are plenty of heroes, but I don't think that group of people gets enough credit.
For those of you who don't work in the industry, having the pleasure of working with so many scientists, that's exactly right, Gene. That's what they're doing it for. Maybe 1 in 100 will be involved with a drug that gets to patients, and it's the greatest privilege for them.
And I forget what drug it was, and I forget the inventor, but it was at, you may know, it was it was an IPO event. It was one of the years you all did the event down at the National Building Museum. And one of the inventors who was recognized just told this story. He said, I was working late in my office one night. He was a university research person. And he said, I don't know why I answered the phone, because I wasn't expecting a call. And when I'm working late like that, I don't normally pick up the phone. And he said, I picked up the phone, and on the other end was somebody who just called to thank him because the drug that he had pioneered saved his life. And he wouldn't be there to make the phone call without him having invented that. And he told that story, and there wasn't like a dry eye in the room as this guy's telling this story. And that's why people do this. Not for the adulation. He didn't expect that, but he wanted to help people like that. And he was very touched by that call. But those happen every day all across our society. And if you know, what I'll just say is, if you know anybody who has a story, I'm interested. I want to hear these stories, and we need to put these together and get them out there, because I do think they affect people when they hear them.
I know we're near the end. On last Tuesday, I was at an offsite for our law department in Washington, D.C., and we had a patient come who was a very prestigious lawyer. His name is Josh, and he talked about he had renal cell carcinoma, and he spoke about how taking the combination of our drugs, Opdivo and Yervoy, and created a remission for him for a significant period of time. He also later, and he flew across the country to come here and talk to us and encourage us to continue doing what we do, because how important it is to him that he got to see a few more years of his children, etc. But he also said that, like many times, he's had a recurrence. And he's now fighting metastases in the rest of his body. He's looking for different types of approaches to treat them. And he just said, we've got so much more work to do. Like, we got so much more. Whatever advances we've made, we've got a lot of work to do to make sure that we address all the needs of all the patients, which may be us, which may be our family members or our friends, and just to move this forward because it's so important.
Yeah. Well, good luck to you. Continue fighting the battles. I know you do daily. You're out there spreading the message, and I'll continue to do it. And maybe at our retirement parties, we'll have a good, happy story to tell.
Yeah, I hope so. And by the way, when I asked AI, will we restore the patent system, it expressed cautious optimism. So let's hope so. Anyway, thank you all.
Thank you.